the fairy godmother appears, and she's going to go ahead and save everything. And many times we hear that phrase, the fairy godmother, and we assume that this is something which has no source in Judaism whatsoever. There's no precedent for that. There's no existence of that, that we are not like a superstitious type of people, and there can't be something. This is clearly Disney creating a fairy godmother, and this would not exist in Judaism. But the truth is that that's not true, that we actually have very strong precedent to the notion. We don't use that terminology of a fairy godmother, but the notion of, maybe we would say, a guardian angel of sorts, that an angel which accompanies us and is with us. So this is something which we do have precedent for.
This is The Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish perspective podcast, where we take ambiguous moral situations in fictional popular movies and TV shows and analyze them from a Torah lens. All right, Rabbi Schaffel, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you. Yeah, me too. Yeah, so Cinderella, this is, it's kind of funny. Like the original that I saw when I was a kid was the 1950 animated version. But I know they're keeping like all these new, these remakes. So I think it's kind of still very present. I'm sure kids still watch it. It's a classic. But yeah, so before I guess we go into the background, the topics we're going to be discussing, I understand this actually is not the first time you've covered this topic. You sent me a great outline, which really goes through like all the sources for all these questions. Can you just give us some background in terms of a bit about you and a bit about how we ended up on Cinderella?
Sure. So as a synagogue rabbi, so one of the things which you have to do is you have to give a Shavuos night. So there's a widespread custom to stay up all night studying Torah. Shavuos is the holiday. It's 7 weeks after Passover. And it's the holiday where we celebrate the event on the Jewish calendar in the year 2448, when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. And many years ago, probably at this point, like close to 15 years ago, the thought occurred to me that I could take one of the classic stories, which everybody knows, one of the classic fairy tales, which everybody knows, and examine it and explore it from a Jewish law perspective. So we're dealing with material which everybody knows, but from a perspective that nobody has ever considered it before. And it turned out to be an incredibly popular class, which I give in the neighborhood. We have about 13 or 14 now stories which we've done where we present the story, and then along the way we narrate the different Jewish law issues which arise, or Jewish philosophical issues which arise, and they get to think about things which, if I said I was going to give a class on this topic, nobody would come. When they hear that topic in the context of the story, which they're familiar with and they've known their entire lives, suddenly it takes on, much more excitement. And it's something which has just been a wonderful opportunity to be able to teach.
Which makes you a perfect guest on this podcast. Really perfect fit. Yeah, that's exactly right. There's something about, talk about gratitude. Okay, gratitude. Okay, should Harry Potter be grateful to the Dursleys? Oh, whoa. Like suddenly people are like, their interest is piqued. Yeah, that's fantastic. I guess
now it comes alive. Right.
Absolutely. Right. So, what we're doing with Cinderella, just so I get a sense, like, look, what other, I guess, topics have you covered?
So we've done Snow White, we did Robin Hood, we did Jack and the Beanstalk. This year we're going to be doing Prince and the Pauper. I did The Lion King one year, Rumpelstiltskin.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't remember all the other ones, but we've done a lot of them.
Are any of these other ones online? Like, is there a podcast form or anyone who's interested?
So unfortunately, due to restrictions of Jewish law, the only time I give, other than 3 of them perhaps, but generally I only give them on the holiday of Shavuos itself, when we're not allowed to record.
Got it.
So I don't have any of these really recorded. There have been some times where people have invited me as a Memorial Day class or a 4th of July when people aren't working, and synagogues will encourage people to come and study. So I visited some synagogues and given some of these classes in that context. But by and large, they haven't really been recorded as of yet. So this is I was very excited to be able to do this, because now I have a sample that I can be able to share with other people. And this is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. And hopefully we'll be able to generate some interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is fantastic. Yeah, hopefully it will. I mean, I know I'm really excited. When I saw this out, I'm like, this is good stuff. Okay, so launching into Cinderella. As a basic background, I'm sure the vast majority of people know the story, but just to make sure anyone who doesn't feel lost. So Cinderella is a story of this, I'm assuming she's like a teenager who Her mother died, and her father remarried eventually this lady named Lady Tremaine, who had two daughters of her own, and they moved in together into Cinderella's father's chateau, Cinderella's house, and then Cinderella's father died shortly thereafter. And Lady Tremaine, her stepmother, is not the nicest lady in the world. And she started mistreating Cinderella terribly and effectively turned her into a scullion, into like a housemaid where Cinderella's living in the attic and there's kind of like a shambles, even though this is her house. And she has to effectively tend to all of Lady Tremaine's needs, and she's washing the house and doing the laundry and doing all these chores. And then eventually, of course, like, the prince is looking for a bride. Cinderella, all the girls in the kingdom are invited. Cinderella meets the prince, and there's a whole like love story. We'll get to that shortly, but that's the basic background. So with that, I'm assuming our first question would naturally be, seeing as Cinderella's and by the way, you can like readjust whichever question you want to ask first, but I imagine the very first question is, Cinderella's an orphan, and Lady Tremaine is mistreating her. Now, Lady Tremaine is also her stepmother. So like, how does that, work? Because at the end of the day, it's kind of her kid. So I guess I'm not sure where we want to start in terms of the parental angle, the kid angle. I'll let you take it away from here. That's our opening scene, if you will.
Got it. Yeah. So one of the things which I do, which I take the I don't know if luxury is the right word, but I take the discretion to do, is I really formulate the story based on my needs. So I will adjust the story. I'm not hesitant to go ahead and move around the story a little bit in order to make it meet my needs. But yes, this is where we are in the story. We start off with this poor orphan girl. It's not Little Orphan Annie. That's a different story, a different podcast, maybe at a different time. But we have this orphan girl, and the Torah, the Bible, is very sensitive to the feelings and the plight of an orphan. And the Torah mentions in numerous cases about how attentive one has to be not to oppress the orphan or a widow. In our case, we're just focused on the orphan. And this is something which there's a work which was written in the medieval times, the early medieval times, called the Sefer HaChinuch, where it was written to enumerate the 613 commandments and then elaborate, not only identify what are the 613 commandments, but to give a little background and a little reasoning why this is a commandment, why this is significant enough to be a commandment. And the Sefer Chinuch, so he says that, he writes that when it comes to an orphan, that one should make sure that all of their interactions with the orphan should be pleasant, should be kind, and should be with compassion. And this is something which applies. Orphan isn't just somebody who is born into a difficult circumstance. He writes explicitly that even if it is the yasum, even if it's the orphan of the king, the sensitivity necessary is still going to be in place. So even a prince or a princess has to be treated with great delicate gloves in order to make sure not to hurt them and not to cause them any sort of pain. And one who doesn't do so God says that he is going to be the one who's going to defend the widow in the orphan. So when somebody starts messing with an orphan, what that means is you're messing with God. God is the bodyguard, as it were, for the orphans. And this is a terrain, Lady Tremaine. This is terrain that you probably don't want to go ahead and start messing around with. The Ramban, one of the medieval commentator on the amongst other works which he wrote, but he wrote a classic commentary on the Torah. So he goes ahead and he says that the reason why God feels responsible to take care of the orphan is because generally somebody has an adult in their lives who's going to be able to take care of them. So I refer very often to when somebody offends a mother. So her mama bear comes out, and the worst place to be in the universe is between a mama bear and her cub. So you start messing with a child, the parents are going to come and they're going to defend their child, and they have somebody to take care of them. So God doesn't feel as much of a responsibility to step in. But when it comes to the orphan who doesn't have that adult to step into their lives, so God says, there's nobody else here. This is my child, and I'm going to go ahead and defend my child. And the outcome of that is something which is not so good. And this is considered to be something which is so severe, such a weighty matter, that the sages from the time of the Talmud, so they relate even from the Mishnah, the early Talmud era. So there were two great. There was the 10 martyrs in the era of what's called the Tanoim, the rabbis of the Mishnah. So there were 10 martyrs. There were 10 great leaders who were murdered by various enemies, by the Romans. Two of them were Reb Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. That's what their names were. So as they were already caught and imprisoned and about to be executed in horrific ways, so they had a conversation with one another. They reflected on what it is that they could have done to have led to this horrific death, which they both knew that they were about to experience. Because they understood that there's nothing random in the universe, that when things happen, they happen for a reason, and they wanted to understand why it is that this is happening. And amongst the things that they said was a very scary thing. He says, maybe there were times in our lives when we were in the bathhouse, before there was indoor plumbing, so you had to go to a public bathhouse in order to take a bath to get ready for a Shabbat or something like that, to get clean. Or maybe we were in the middle of a meal, and we're sitting, we're eating after a long day. You come home and you're famished and you just want to get some food into your system because you're so hungry. And at that moment, an orphan came knocking on the door and said, do you have any food for us? Do you have any money for us? And maybe we said to them that the language is, Ein hasha pnuya lanu. We don't have any time right now. Come back later. And just the fact that you delayed them by saying, not now, come back later, that these two great rabbis thought that would be enough of a justification for them to suffer the horrific death which they were about to suffer. That's how sensitive this matter is. That's how delicate this matter is that with all of the merit which they had generated with their righteousness and with their scholarship in their teaching of others, and one of them was the high priest who served in the temple, with all of that merit which they would have generated, they were still susceptible to this punishment because they weren't sensitive enough to the orphans when they came wanting food. And it's not as if they said no. They weren't mean to them. They weren't rude to them. They didn't say, we're not giving you, get a job, go make something of yourself. They simply said, I'm in the middle of the bath. Give me 5 minutes to get myself dressed and I'll get you some stuff. Or I'm in the middle of eating. Come back after the meal in 10 minutes and I'll be more than happy to share with you. But even that demonstrated a degree of a lack of sensitivity to the plight and the circumstance of the orphans. And therefore, they felt that was enough a reason that they would be held accountable and they would experience this terrible death. And the Mishnah Berurah is written by somebody who's known as the Chafetz Chaim, one of the great righteous individuals at the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, was well known for his righteousness, but he was also an enormous scholar and wrote one of the more widely accepted books on day-to-day Jewish law called the Mishnah Berurah. So he has a section where he talks about the need to go ahead and be sensitive to the orphans, and he makes the point that the sensitivity, this is always something which is scary for teachers. Teachers may have in their classroom somebody who's an orphan, and now what happens if that child doesn't do well in school? They get a failing mark. So does this obligation say you can't give them an F because they got a 20 out of 100? So you can't give them an F because it's an orphan and you have to give them 100% each time? What happens if they need some rebuke, not in a harsh way, but they need to be told that something is unacceptable and they may feel bad as a result of that? So are you allowed to go ahead and correct them, act as a teacher towards them, or do they get a free pass for whatever it is that they want? They could ditch, and they could skip, and they could cheat, and they could do all of those things because you're not allowed to say anything to them. So the Mishnah Berurah says that the restriction is really only in general life matters, but if you are speaking to them in the context of trying to educate them, trying to make them into better people. And the way to do that is you have to give them an F so that they'll be aware that their study habits are not up to speed and that they need to invest more time. So that's an acceptable thing. So teachers don't have to be soft. They still need to be sensitive. Whatever rebuke and whatever correction that they're going to give the orphans, they have to do so in an incredibly sensitive manner, realizing that the child is already incredibly vulnerable by not having a parent or parents. But at the same time, it is important to properly educate these children as well, so that they should grow up and be able to be competent and contributing members of society.
If I can, I would say is a fair way of summarizing that idea that the teacher can still give the appropriate grade, But instead of say, like, let's say you have a kid who, thank God, both of his parents are alive and well, and, they're involved. So it could be like, look, here's the F, and then you can assume that the parents are going to address it. Whereas with the orphan, it'd be like, you kind of pull them aside after class, be like, hey, here's the grade. Here's why I did it. If like you need extra, so is that the idea in terms of the way it's communicated? Like your investment into the child, like he's not protected from bad grades that are, fair grades, but the approach here is that the key to like that specific situation?
Correct. Yeah, there'll be a perfect way of being able to say it. Is that, listen, you got this grade. How can I help you? Do better? What can we do to make this easier for you? What can we do to structure things so that you'll be able to feel more successful and be more successful in what you're doing? So it should be done. I mean, this is true, really true. It's a different topic, but it's really true for all kids, is that whatever correction is done should be done in an encouraging way rather than a discouraging way. But certainly for the orphan, it's necessary to demonstrate an even higher level of sensitivity to that. Assume that they have an allergy to anything which is going to be negative, and therefore, whatever feedback that they're going to receive, even corrective feedback, has to be very positively spun rather than that they should experience it as negative and a criticism, and that this compounds the circumstance of not having a parent or parents to be able to help them master the material or whatever it is that they need.
Right, that's fair. And just as like anecdotally, I remember, unfortunately, when I was 21, my mother passed away. And then one of my sisters I have 4 sisters. One of my sisters is 19, and her friend and her classmate, her mother also died like 6 months after my mom died. But then the father was also sick with cancer, and he died 2 years later. Oh, so you had a 21-year-old, and her younger brother was 17. Thank God, I think they were of means. But I remember this is like the first time I'd ever encountered someone who I actually knew who was like just a full-blown orphan. When the mother passed away, it was like kind of like relatable. We're like, yeah, we understand what it was like. And then when the father passed away, it was like, okay, I have absolutely no idea what that. It was such a jarring. Even as someone who had lost a parent, I was like, I can't imagine what it's like. And the thing is, the 17-year-old was still in school. I mean, the 21-year-old was too, but at least she was like 21. She was in college, whatever. But like a 17, like he's going to high school, and you could just imagine, like, you're right, he can't be protected from the grades that he earned, but you'd imagine that hopefully the teachers would. I mean, I know for my youngest sister was 15 at the time, and like they delayed her. I mean, my mom died May 16th. There's actually the yahrzeit just happened to be yesterday on Shabbos. Yeah. So my sister. Thank you, amen. But so my sister was 15. The school kind of postponed her exams. I think they just canceled them entirely just to help her like cope, because it was, again, close to exam period. So I think that, and that was just for one parent. So it's just, it's, I think, thank God, I think most people like don't know any orphans. So it's like so remote, like they're in the foster care system, you never see them. But when you do, it's so jarring to imagine what it must be like. But anyway, so yes, definitely point taken. And it is beautiful that Judaism addresses this so directly. And it's very frightening to imagine that God's going to step in if you start, no.
So I'm happy that you mentioned that, because the last point that the Mishnah Berurah mentions is the question is always, how long is one able to pull out the orphan card? There's some Jewish joke about some 80-year-old who was caught stealing, and the judge was going to sentence him, and he threw himself on the mercy of the court because he's an orphan. So like at what point do we say that, listen, the orphan card has expired and you're no longer, we're not going to treat you delicately anymore? So the Mishnah Berurah says that it's not a function of age. It's a function of when the person is able to take care of their needs independently. So as long as they're still dependent upon others, especially, a teenager, especially the person that you talked about, that neither parents are around, a teenager doesn't know how to handle finances, adult finances. There's so many bills that need to be paid. There's mortgages, there's insurances, there's healthcare costs, there's utilities, there's all that stuff. A teenager, they have no clue how any of that stuff, and they're going to be reliant on other people to take care of them for many years to come, till they're old enough, mature enough, and capable enough, and taking care of themselves completely independently. And until that point, then they still have that orphan card that they have to be dealt with very, very gently and very delicately.
Interesting. Just as a point of clarification, what would that look like for a prince, I guess? Someone who's assuming, presumably people are taking care of him.
Right. So a prince, maybe even more so. Prince is probably a snowflake. The way we would imagine it now is that everything has been taken care of for him. He probably has almost zero resilience because he's never actually faced adversity. And now, if you were to thrust him into the adulthood, so he really wouldn't know what to do. So he has all the resources in terms of money and the entire kingdom behind him, but he's not able to take care of himself in terms of making decisions and guiding the direction of his life. Other people are making the decisions for him. Other people are telling him what to do. He has the advisor telling him this, and the advisor's telling him that, and he becomes, he just nods his head and lets everybody take care of him. That's their job, is to take care of him. But he's not independent yet.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
One would have to be able to be independent in running their own lives. You don't have to be wealthy. You could be dirt poor and still be independent until you figure out on your own how to go ahead and take care of yourself.
That makes sense. And now I guess like kind of the other side of this, would it make sense to move on to like what Cinderella's obligations are towards her stepmother?
Yeah, so her stepmother, so Jewish law is very clear that there is an obligation for children to honor their stepmother or stepfather. So just like in the Ten Commandments, we know, honor your mother and father. So that is something which is widely known. But there are many people who have a mother and a father and a stepmother and a stepfather. And now the question is, to what degree, if at all, does a child have to honor a stepfather or a stepmother? And here we have Cinderella and her evil stepmother. What everybody has in their mind about the evil stepmother comes, I think, from the Cinderella story. So what is it? So certainly we would, from Cinderella's perspective, we would imagine she wants to tell her stepmother to jump in the lake. I'm not your maid. I'm not your servant. I'm not your anything. And how dare you treat me this way? But is she allowed to say that or not? So in what's considered to be the primary source for practical Jewish law, called the Shulchan Aruch, so it's very clear. It comes from the Talmud itself, but it says very clearly, Shulchan Aruch says very clearly that a person is obligated to honor his stepmother, even though it's not his biological mother. Or she, in Cinderella's case, she is obligated to honor her stepmother, even though it's not her biological mother. But there's a caveat to that, which is that obligation, it's not that there's honor which is due to the stepmother directly. One honors a stepmother because that's considered to be a subset of the honor she would have to give her father. So since she has to give her father, and her father chose to marry this woman, so part of Cinderella's honor to her father would be to show honor to the father's new wife. What that creates, though, is when the father's no longer around, when the father dies, and it's just a stepmother and a stepdaughter, so then it's very clear, Eino chai b'kvod, and there's no obligation to give them honor in that case, but it's appropriate to do so even after they pass away. So it becomes a more flexible type of relationship in terms of the dynamics between them, whether or not, in the case, if Cinderella's father had passed away, if he was not in the picture, whether or not she would have an ongoing obligation, not that she necessarily had a choice, because as we'll talk about, she was seemingly imprisoned over here, but in the ideal situation, it could very well be that if there was a tense relationship between the stepmother and the stepdaughter, and the biological father is no longer in the picture, it could be that the stepdaughter could step away and say, listen, your right to expect honor from me has expired with the passing of my father. The 7 days of mourning for my father, your husband, have now gone, and now we're going to part ways, and we're never going to speak to each other again. So she may very well be justified in doing so, but ideally there are always different dynamics in the family where it may be appropriate or necessary to maintain a relationship, and certainly a respectful relationship, but it's not the same thing as a parent.
Interesting. And you actually brought something up that I thought was interesting because I didn't think about this. You said it's possible for a person to have a mother and a father, and a stepmother and a stepfather. Is there any, so that's not the situation here in terms of Cinderella. I mean, as far as I understand, Cinderella's mother died and then her father remarried. Does that change anything? Like if you only have a father and a stepmother because your other parent is deceased, is that change a factor, or is it doesn't make a difference? It's the same situation?
So that will be the same, whether there's one step parent or both step parents. Either way, you have, as one would imagine, if both sets of parents are alive and both of them are remarried, so then we know what the answer is, but there will be circumstances, sadly, there will be circumstances where honoring, let's say, one's mother and honoring one's stepmother could come in conflict with one another.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so this is what I generally refer to in the synagogue by me. I tell them that this is the rock, paper, scissors of Jewish law. So you have two values which are in conflict with one another, both of which may be commandments, but they're in conflict with one another, and somehow we have to choose one path. Are we going to go this way? Or are we going to go that way? What is going to prevail? That's why I said, like, rock, paper, scissors. What beats what? So the honor of the mother will obviously beat out the honor of the stepmother.
Well, and I'm assuming the deeper question here is, because if you honor your mother at the expense of the stepmother, then in a way you're dishonoring your father. I'm assuming that's the underlying tension.
That could be that could be a potential risk. So one has to be a very wise individual to be able to mediate between all the different personalities and all the different conflicts over there. This is another one of these things which I say, one of the things they don't teach you in rabbi school about how to mediate such situations, but it's sometimes very necessary because there could be a lot at stake in terms of the dynamics of the family, and it becomes a very sensitive issue. That's for sure. The flip side of that, everybody's familiar with the obligation to honor parents and perhaps even step-parents, but in the same section of Jewish law that talks about the honor that a child has to give to a parent, and this is going to be directed specifically towards Lady Tremaine, so the Shulchan Aruch, the same book on Jewish law, says that it's prohibited for a parent to overburden their child, and to be overburdened with them, and to make demands of them, and to disgrace and to demean the child. So although even if we say that Cinderella had some sort of obligation to honor Lady Tremaine, and even Cinderella's own father has no right to be overbearing or demeaning to their child or stepchild. So Lady Tremaine certainly was in violation of that aspect of Jewish law by demeaning and overburdening Cinderella by making all of these demands of her in terms of housework and all of that, all of that stuff. So she's not such a righteous individual, in the story over here.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. It sounds like she's got two strikes against her. She's got oppressing an orphan and being overly demanding as a parent.
Right. Right.
Just for the sake of completion, what would happen if just to take the facts at hand, Lady Tremaine remarried? It's kind of a bad example because Lady Tremaine herself is, not such a great person. But if a person has a stepmother, and then like Cinderella's father dies, the stepmother then marries somebody else. Do we keep pushing that requirement to honor people all the way through, or is at that point like the stepmother's new husband just has there's nothing there, or is there no, because it's an extension of further extension of the honor that is due a parent? Is that too far?
Yeah, no, I love the question over here. It's I don't remember seeing it inside, but as you were formulating the question, what seems logical to me, what seems to make sense is that the right that the stepmother has, the right that Lady Tremaine has to receive honor from Cinderella is only because Lady Tremaine is considered to be the widow of Cinderella's father. When Lady Tremaine remarries, she's no longer the widow of Cinderella's father. She's now the wife of the new fellow. And once she's the wife of the new fellow, it could be that the obligation to honor her from Cinderella may fall away completely because it's no longer her stepmother. She was only a stepmother as long as she was the widow of her deceased husband. But once she remarries, so she moves into a new home in a new circumstance, and that may sever the stepdaughter-stepmother relationship entirely.
Oh, wow. That went in a completely different direction.
There are other areas of Jewish law which I think would be precedent to say such a thing, that once she remarries, then she's done, that she's out of the picture.
Okay, awesome. That's so interesting. I'm glad I asked that. I was like, am I going a little too far? But no, I'm glad I clarified that.
If Cinderella only knew, she should have got Lady Tremaine remarried earlier in the story, and she could have saved herself from all of that trouble. Yeah.
That's funny. That would have been a great twist.
Yeah,
a new adaptation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I guess moving on into the kind of the main portion of the story in terms of, we know that Cinderella is kind of being oppressed by her step family. But then the royal decree goes out, and the king is looking for a shidduch, right, a suitable partner for his son, the prince. So the prince needs to find a bride, and the decree goes out. All maidens should step forward and present themselves to the king. So he's the king. Now, Cinderella is an aristocrat, which is kind of interesting, but kind of interesting to think of how does Jewish law approach this idea of marrying a king? I mean, the prince who's the heir to the throne. Is that so simple? Is there, one popular TV show recently was Game of Thrones, where there's a very narrow range of candidates who are suitable for, the high lords. And if you misstep, that could end in disaster, as it did for one of the heroes of the story. So, and again, there's no war, at least that we know of, in Cinderella. But how does Jewish law approach that? Or am I taking a completely wrong angle here in general?
So there's in the Talmud. So there's a discussion. The Talmud makes draws a comparison and a contrast between two figures in the Bible. The Bible meaning not only the Torah, but in the prophets and the writings of two kings, as it were, who were looking for a new bride. One of them was King David, and the other was Achashverosh from the Purim story. So the Talmud draws a contrast that, based on a verse, it considers King David, to be a very wise individual, whereas Achashverosh was a very foolish individual. Why is that so? So the Talmud explains that when the announcement went out by King David that he was looking for a new bride, everybody wanted their daughter to be able to marry King David. That was something which would have been very exciting. It would have been a feather in the hat of anybody in the country to be able to go ahead and marry King David, who was the star of his, in many ways, the star of his generation. When Achashverosh sent out the decree saying, I'm looking for a new wife and I want, everybody should come. So the Talmud says that everybody who cared about their daughter tried to hide their daughter because they didn't want their daughter to end up being married to him as a king. What's the difference? So there's different explanations which they give, but the basic idea is that everybody knew that Achashverosh was an immoral individual. And they knew that he was going to, we'll keep it clean, he was going to test drive all of his potential wives. In knowing that he's such an immoral, disgusting individual, so nobody wanted their daughters to be subjected to that, because all he cared about was beauty. And he cared about a certain type of beauty. And as a result of that, they were afraid that if they send their daughters and their daughters don't meet that criteria, that they'll just be used and abused, and then they'll be sent home, and nobody wanted to subject their daughters to that. When the announcement went out by King David that he was looking for a bride, they didn't mention anything about beauty at all. They knew that King David was looking for a woman of character. And therefore, they all wanted to send their daughters to have that privilege of being able to marry King David, because he was looking for a person of character. And this is something, but in both cases, it seemed to be that there were not restrictions in terms of who the king could potentially marry. You think maybe the king is going to marry from the priestly family. Maybe he's going to marry there wasn't any other aristocratic family, but maybe he'll marry the family of some other leader. But it doesn't seem to be that that's the case. He was looking for a person of quality, a person who was going to be a righteous individual, and that's what he was looking for.
That's amazing. So it sounds like in Jewish law, it also seems like the same thing for Achashverosh. It didn't seem like there were any restrictions in terms of needing to marry from certain families. So is that right? According to Jewish law, like the king can marry from any family, it's like a carte blanche effectively, in the best way possible?
As far as I know, I don't know any sources to the contrary that the king could marry. He has a restriction on how many wives he could have, but can't go past 18. but short of that, within the 18, it seems to be that he has the discretion of who he would like to marry.
Wow, so interesting. So it doesn't seem like, at least, like that was much of a moral dilemma in terms of the fact that the prince the royal court put out an invitation it just depending on what the reputation of the royal family is, how many women are going to respond to that call.
Right. So it seemed to be from the story that Lady Tremaine was very excited to send her daughters to be the one. Now, the fact that Lady Tremaine was excited, we would assume, just based on her character, that it was probably, she did so in a self-serving manner. She wanted to be the mother of the queen mother or something like that, whatever the term would be, to give herself honor and esteem and prestige in that regard. But yeah, that's what she was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I was thinking as you were talking about Achashverosh and how everyone hid their daughters, I was like, aren't there enough like self-serving people? But I guess the idea is like Achashverosh was so self-serving and was such a selfish, disgusting person that even those people were like, no matter how this ends up, it's not going to benefit me.
Yeah. So what's interesting about Achashverosh, it's not part of Cinderella, but it's part of Achashverosh. It's interesting to consider for those familiar with the story. So the women would show up, and the makeup ladies and the hair ladies in Achashverosh's palace, they would get all of the women dressed up in order to be presented to the king. And it seems from the description in those verses that they all dressed and looked exactly the same. So that's why Achashverosh was sort of stuck trying to figure out who he was going to marry, because there was a certain image of what the queen should look like. And all of them dressed in that image, with that makeup, with that hair, with that clothing. So you have 1,000 or 10,000 girls who walk in and they all look exactly the same. So how do you choose between 10,000 when they all look exactly the same? It's like an impossible task. Esther, if you remember the story, Esther, she said, I don't need anything special. And she went in looking a little bit different than everybody else. So she stood out right away because she looked different than everybody else. But Achashverosh was so superficial that he had this very specific image of what his queen should look like, and everybody who he interviewed had to look that part. And that's why he was sort of confounded by making a decision, because how do you decide between 10,000 of the exact same thing?
That is interesting. Yeah.
So in the story, what happens is that Lady Tremaine is very excited to send her daughters to the ball, but under no circumstances was she going to send Cinderella. And with her daughters, she went and she bought them dresses, and he had special stuff which was made for them. And Cinderella was just, again, left cleaning the house and doing all of that stuff. Certainly in the Disney version of it, so as the daughters were going through outfits and rejecting them and tearing them up and whatnot, so you end up with this pile of leftover clothing on the floor. And in the Disney version, the mice come along, the mice who are Cinderella's friends, they gather together the ribbons and the buttons and the pearls and all of the sequins and all of that stuff, and they go ahead and they manufacture a beautiful dress for Cinderella.
Right. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I do remember that. I remember the dress. I don't remember about the rags.
So the question, which from a Jewish law perspective is that we know that you're not allowed to use somebody else's stuff without permission.
Right, that's just stealing.
Right, stealings. So if Lady Tremaine bought this for her daughters, what right would Cinderella have to now wear a dress which is made from effectively stolen materials? So is that allowed? Is that not allowed? So there's a category in Jewish law called Aveda Midas. Aveda Midas would translate as intentionally abandoning your possession. So on Sunday, I don't know what happens by you, but by me, there are trucks which go around. Those are the metal collectors. And they go around on Sunday in the neighborhood. And if somebody put out by their trash any metal, which would be valuable to them, so they come along and they pick it up. So it's on my property, and they come along and they pick it up. Why are they allowed to pick it up? Because I've clearly demonstrated I have no interest in this anymore. If you don't take it now, the garbage men are going to take it tomorrow morning. So that will be called like an Aveda Midas. I'm intentionally abandoning it by leaving it out on the curb.
That's interesting. Just actually to share, so like I'm Canadian, and there's this huge coffee chain in Canada called Tim Hortons. I think even Americans have heard of it because it's so big. But I don't know if they do this anymore, but for sure, like for me growing up, they had every so often, one time a year for a few months, they'd have this roll up the rim to win. And so you could get a free coffee or whatever, $100, and then there were some grand prizes, which was like a car. So I'm pretty sure, I did not look this up in advance, but I definitely remember hearing this story. There were two friends, they got their cup and it's automatic, right? You buy a coffee cup, you don't have to buy a special cup, it just comes automatically. And so these two friends were having their cup, and then one of them finished it and threw it into the garbage. And so the other person was like, aren't you going to check check your cup. Yeah, you know exactly where this is going.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the person's like, oh, like, what are the chances? Who cares what I'm going to do? Get like free cup of coffee? I don't care. So the other person went and fished into the garbage, took it out, rolled up the rim, and won a car.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So then you can imagine the original person probably felt not particularly wise. And apparently they went to court about it. And the Canadian court said, like, you threw it in the garbage, like you abandoned possession, like it was trash at that point. And then the person went and fished it out, and now it's his. Like that, the person who took it out of the garbage wins.
Yeah, exactly. So on that topic, so there is such a concept, although which we'll get to a little bit later, about returning lost objects, but something where, based on circumstances, it clearly indicates that the owner intentionally abandoned it. So then it falls into the category of aveda midas, intentional abandonment. There's a debate between rabbis about what exactly is the status of something which was intentionally abandoned. There's one opinion which says something which is intentionally abandoned, all that means is that if you find it, you don't have to go ahead and return it to me. So when you see that I left something out on the curb, intentionally abandoning, you don't have to pick it up and say, Rabbi Schaffel, I just found this stuff on your curb. You probably lost it. I'm going to return it to you. You could just drive by and ignore it because obviously I left it out on the curb. It's going to get taken, and I'm intentionally abandoning it. But that opinion says it's not yours for the taking. It's still mine, but you don't have to go ahead and return it to me. A second opinion maintains that if I intentionally abandon something, then I've effectively made it ownerless. And once I make it ownerless, then you can come along and you can take it for yourself. And it's interesting that you mentioned the case of the coffee cup, because one of the classic commentators in the area of Jewish law that relates to business ethics and whatnot, called the Nesivos HaMishpat, the Nesivos HaMishpat actually explains that there's a difference between abandoning something and throwing something in the trash.
Oh, interesting.
Throwing something in the trash is even more of a statement that I'm never going to take it again. And therefore, he asserts that everybody would agree that anybody could come along and take it for themselves.
Fascinating. Hang on. So in that case, I have a further clarification. So what's often the case is, so the metal is one thing. And obviously, if you put like a bookshelf, that sounds like you're intentionally abandoning, but not putting in the garbage. Other times, you literally throw things into like those big garbage bins, and then you put it out into like, the public thoroughfare or whatever, the trash. So in such a case, I'm assuming once you put it into the garbage bin and put it out, that's garbage. That's you threw into the trash. Unlike, say, putting out a bookshelf or pieces of metal. That's so interesting, even though it's in the exact same place. I don't understand, like, so what's the magic that happens for, like, so in the back, right, there's in Chicago, this isn't, I don't think it's so common in Montreal, but in Chicago, you have these like back alleys, between the houses where the garbage trucks and the recycling trucks. So what happens if I put this metal piece in the back over there? Because I know you put yours in the front. It's the same thing in the suburbs where my in-laws live. You put your garbage out in the front, whereas for us it's in the alley. Does that, I mean, just for clarification, does that change anything? Like, the only reason I'm putting something in the back alley is because it's in the garbage, effectively. It's just, it's too big to fit. So if I can just ask for clarification there.
So I would imagine that if you put it out where the trash is picked up, so then I don't think there's going to be a difference whether it went into the trash bin or next to the trash bin. When you put it out in the place where the garbage men are going to come and take it, so then it's clear that you're tossing it, you're discarding it, and you're effectively giving up ownership of it. There's a difference in Jewish law between something which looks like it was placed there and the owner just went away for a moment, like you find a bat or a ball or a mitt in the park. So it may be that the person's just in a different part of the park and they're coming back, versus something which clearly looks like it was abandoned. You find a piece of drywall on McCormick Avenue, right, right off of Oakton. So clearly the person, it fell off of his car. They're not coming back for that thing. It happened accidentally, and nobody goes back to get the drywall which fell off of their car. And if they were going to do so, they would have stopped right away. The fact that it's still there, that means that they abandoned it. So we differentiate between something which looks like it was placed there and something where, in all likelihood, it was discarded.
Okay, got it. And then I guess coming back to the situation at hand, so the girls, were trying on, like the stepsisters were trying on clothes, and they threw it to the side. I guess I'm actually going to rely on you. I don't remember the exact scene. Does it look like did they actually tear it up and break apart the portals, or were they just kind of, it's like laundry?
So in the Disney version, so they were I don't want to say criticizing. They were very clear. They didn't want these dresses at all. They made it very clear. So I was excited when I saw that part of the video, that they were very clear that they don't want. I don't want to see this. This is disgusting. This is ugly. This is whatever it is that they were saying, but clearly indicated that they had no intention of recovering it.
Got it. Okay, fine. So that's like the Aveda Midas, the intentional abandonment, and then I'm assuming I think the mice go and take it and repossess it for Cinderella.
Correct.
So was that okay for Cinderella to do?
So it seems to be that if they abandoned it, if they were throwing it away, the way Disney presents it, it seems like that was the type of Aveda Midas. That's the type of intentional abandonment where you're effectively declaring it to be ownerless. And once you declare it to be ownerless, so then anybody could come along and take it. Then it's ownerless. It's literally ownerless. So they can take it and they can make it into a new dress. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So Cinderella was within her rights to use it and I guess create turn into her own dress.
So when Cinderella sees the dress that the mice had made for her, so she gets all excited. She gets all dressed up. She does her makeup and her hair in an instant. It's done. And then when everybody's going out to get into the Uber, we imagine that they got into some sort of Uber to go to the ball. So the stepsisters see the dress, which was worn by Cinderella, and they recognize that's their ribbons and their sash and their beads and all of that stuff. And they, not knowing the Jewish law, they claim, hey, that's my dress, that's my stuff. And they now start rebuking her. I take a little bit of rabbinic license, but they start telling her, you're not allowed to wear our dress. That's our dress. So they're giving her, in a sense, rebuke for the fact that she's now wearing a stolen dress. All of a sudden, they become the pious, righteous ones who need to set the record straight. They need to make sure that Cinderella is going to be compliant with Jewish law. So she goes ahead, they go ahead, and they decide that they are going to give her that rebuke.
Am I wrong to say that sounds fair? It sounds fair for them to rebuke her?
No, they were completely off, but it's a good topic to discuss nonetheless. The topic of rebuke, because we live in a time, this is a little bit more the philosophical rather than the Jewish law, but we live in a time where we, by and large, say, live and let live. If nobody's hurting you, what do you care what anybody else is doing? It's none of your business. It's a very libertarian type of thing to just say that if somebody else wants to do what they do, who are you to go ahead and tell them that what they're doing is wrong? And this is something which there's a clear obligation from the Torah, from the Bible, to rebuke people when you see them doing wrong. Now, in most instances, practically, it's not applicable because we don't know how to give appropriate rebuke where the person isn't going to be offended and turned off and all of that stuff. So most things, meaning like 99% of things, are better left unsaid rather than addressed directly. But nonetheless, there is this idea of rebuke. And there's a very famous idea. There's a commentary on the Torah, maybe 300-400 years ago, called the Kli Yakar. And the Kli Yakar gives a very famous idea about why it's necessary to give rebuke and what the Torah's perspective on rebuke is, rather than that libertarian type of perspective, live and let live. So the way that the Kli Yakar writes it is you imagine there's a bunch of people on a boat. And all of a sudden, as they're enjoying the Chicago skyline and the Windella boats or whatever it is, so they're enjoying the Chicago skyline, and then all of a sudden they hear a power tool, and they all look over to the source of the noise, and they see some guy has a power drill and he's drilling a hole under his seat in the boat, and everybody starts yelling at him and say, "What are you doing?" He says, "What do you mean? It's my seat. I paid for it. I could do whatever I want to my seat. If I want to drill a hole under my seat, what is it your business?" And they obviously say to him, "You're an idiot because we're all going to drown. The boat's going to sink because you're drilling a hole under your seat. We're all going to be impacted by that." So the Kli Yakar, this commentary says that that's the perspective. We have to see that we are all interconnected with one another, and the behavior of one person impacts everybody else. And a person can't say, "Listen, I'm going to do what I want to do. It's none of your business. Leave me alone." Because since we're all interconnected, we're all sharing the same boat, as it were. If you start drilling a hole under your seat, then that puts the rest of us potentially at risk. And that's something which, when we take the idea of Achdus, of the unity of the Jewish people, it's not something which is just a kumbaya type of perspective, but it's something which we see as a very real part of our existence as the Jewish people, our shared responsibility, our collective fate with one another. And therefore, that's why we want to be sensitive to what other people are doing, because it impacts everybody.
So actually what that just reminded me of, I remember when I was in law school, I actually took a bankruptcy class. And so again, being Canadian, it's a little concerning how expensive it is to go to, university. And as I think most people know, student debt generally cannot be cleared by declaring bankruptcy, right? It's protected, like it's federally protected debt, and there's no way to get rid of it unless you pay it off. Like unless in the most extreme circumstances you can get it out. I know this is currently an issue, like going through the courts and whatever in federal law, but for the most part you can't. So this bankruptcy judge, who was the professor, told us that the reason why this started. Now again, I have not fact-checked it. I just assumed like this is a pretty highly qualified person who deals with this on a daily basis and is a judge. I'm pretty sure either he said or maybe one of his guest speakers spoke about this, but he said that the reason why it came to pass was, I think it was in the 1970s, there were I don't know what it was, like it wasn't such a large group of people, maybe 12, 20, whatever, like, a fairly small group of, I think it was doctors, physicians. They graduated, declared bankruptcy, wiped out their student debt, and then 10 years later, obviously had these super successful practices and were like extraordinarily wealthy, right? Or whatever, like for professional, like not billionaire levels, but it's certainly probably like, millionaires or whatnot. And so this got national press, and you can imagine the level of outrage of these people who are like declaring bankruptcy when these like wealthy like doctors and professionals with their own practices. So I think at that point, that's when, the Congress started to like pass these laws that said you can't declare bankruptcy on your student debt. And obviously, once you have federal protections that there's no bankruptcy permitted, the tuition starts to skyrocket because they knew that there's just no concerns here anymore. Like if you want to go to school, you have to pay the tuition, and you have to pay tuition. There's no way to get rid of it other than to pay it off. But that I think was like a perfect example. Sorry, I know it's a large digression, but that is like, if people are like, oh, come on, like, it's a big deal, you have one bad actor. It's like, yeah, those bad actors, if they get enough, coverage, it can affect literally millions of people for generations to come. Yeah, so that's just one.
Yes, excellent. So then we know in the story at that point, so they jump in the Uber, they leave Cinderella in their ribbed dress behind. And then all of a sudden what appears, I forgot exactly what she says, but the fairy godmother appears. And she's going to go ahead and save everything. And many times we hear that phrase, the fairy godmother, and we assume that this is something which has no source in Judaism whatsoever. There's no precedent for that. There's no existence of that we are not like a superstitious type of people. And there can't be something. This is clearly Disney creating a fairy godmother, and this would not exist in Judaism. But the truth is that that's not true. That we actually have very strong precedent to the notion, we don't use that terminology of a fairy godmother, but the notion of, maybe we would say, a guardian angel of sorts, that an angel which accompanies us and is with us. So this is something which we do have precedent for. The most famous example of that is found in the Talmud, in the tractate about Shabbos, where it talks about Shabbos, where they say that if a person prays on Friday night, they pray the Friday night services, and then they go home and the person has his house all put together, the beds are made, the table is set, everybody's dressed, everything is ready when they come home. So there's two angels, it actually describes, Shnei malachei sharis melavin lo la'adam. Two angels accompany a person to their home, from the synagogue to their home on Friday night. And in the event that everything is put together as it should, so Malach Tov, the good angel, the good guardian angel, will go ahead and say, offer a short prayer that next week the house should be put together just like this week. And the bad angel, Malach Ra, the bad angel, is forced to go ahead and say Amen, is forced to go ahead and confirm and wish that will be the case as well. But in the event that when the person comes home from synagogue on Friday night and the house is not ready, so then the bad angel is able to say, hopefully next week it would also be in shambles and will be a mess. And the good angel is forced to go ahead and say, Amen, is forced to confirm that. So this idea of a good angel or a bad angel, a guardian angel or a fairy godmother, again, whatever terminology that you would like to do, it's not something which is considered to be so foreign in Jewish law and Jewish thought. There's other areas where you would find an expression of this as well, but this is something which, for many people, they assume that this is just Disney and can't be true. But the Talmud has examples of this, numerous examples of this type of this reality, the spiritual reality of angels which are following us around and protecting us or guiding us or observing what's happening.
So that's interesting. Does it change the fact that, in Cinderella's interacting with her fairy godmother? Does that, do we have precedent for that, like speaking to these protective angels?
There's definitely precedent to the notion of speaking to angels at time. How angels at time could take on some sort of human form, and that one could, like in this story with Abraham, where he was sitting by the tent and he was waiting for guests to come, and the 3 guests come, which turned out to be actual angels, but they looked like humans. He thought that they were humans because they took on human form. So he definitely interacted with angels at that time. So the mechanics of that, how exactly that works, that angels could sometimes take on human form and sometimes not. The notion, which I imagine everybody's familiar with, that Eliyahu Hanavi, that Elijah the prophet, shows up at every Brit Milah. We have a special chair for him that he comes. We know at the Passover Seder, we put out a special cup for by the 3rd cup, between the 3rd and the 4th cup, for Elijah the prophet, because we assume that he's going to come, and the children get all excited trying to watch the cup and see if some of that is missing. So we definitely have this idea in Jewish thought of the presence of otherworldly beings who are able to visit in our world here. I imagine that to be able to interact with those angels, the good angel and the bad angel, one would have to be on an incredibly high spiritual level to be able to know that they're interacting with such a being. But it is something which we recognize as a part of Jewish thought, overall Jewish thought.
Fascinating. And then I guess part of the debate here, and this is like, there's so many different ways we could tackle this, like Harry Potter, it's using magic. But the point is, the fairy godmother works magic for Cinderella. Gives her this magic card and turns, the mice into, I think, the horses, and like all these different pets into different things to help Cinderella make her way to the ball. So I guess the question is, like, that's witchcraft. Is there an issue here, or like am I misphrasing? Is it different because it's coming from a malach? I guess I'm assuming that an angel has certain powers and they could do it, and that's totally kosher and fine. How do we pair this? Is this witchcraft or is this like angel magic?
It's interesting that there's a very surprisingly broad discussion from the terminology that you would find in Jewish law sources. So they don't use the term magic or something like that, but they talk about benefiting from something which is miraculous. What does that mean, to benefit from something which is miraculous? So one example that the Talmud gives is that there was a person named Elazar Ish Birta. There was a person. He was a incredibly pious, righteous individual, an incredibly caring and giving individual. And he would literally give away every penny that he had in his pocket to the poor and not save anything for himself. I had a great uncle who was also known as a big tzaddik, and he taught in the yeshiva here. He taught in HTC, and after a while, the institution realized that they have to send the check to his wife rather than to him, because if they gave him the check, he gave all the money to the poor before he ever got home. So the only way the family would be taken care of is they had to send the check to her so that she would be in charge of the money rather than him, because he literally would give everything away. He was that type of person. So the Talmud tells the story of this person who was a similar thing, that if you could imagine such a thing, that the people who would go around collecting charity would run away from him because they knew that he literally gave everything away without concern for himself, and they didn't want to be responsible for his family starving and not having means. Wow. So the Talmud tells the story that he was on his way to go purchase stuff for his daughter to get married. So he had a collection of money to do so, and again, he sees one of these people is collecting, and this Elazar Ish Birta runs after the collector and says, "Who are you collecting for?" He says that there's some orphan girl that she needs money for her wedding. So he throws all the money on that person. He says, what are you doing? You have to take care of your own daughter. She says, my daughter has a father. He'll take care of her. But this orphan girl, she doesn't have anybody to take care of her. So how else is she going to get money? So you take this money and whatever. So the Talmud says he was left with one zuz, let's say $1 to his name at that point. He comes home and he throws it in the granary. And then when his daughter says, okay, father, you went to go get me the stuff for the wedding. So what do you got? So he says, all the stuff I purchased, I put in the granary. And the mother asks about it. There's a whole conversation between the mother and the daughter. And they go out, and lo and behold, they go out there miraculously. The granary is filled with grain to the point where you can't even close the door. There's so much grain there that it's bursting at the seams. So the daughter goes to her father.
And I'm guessing the granary was not full when he threw it.
It was empty. It had previously been empty. Right, it was completely empty. He threw in the coin, and then when they go to look at it, it's now miraculously filled with grain. So the daughter runs into the study house where her father is studying, and she says, she was all excited. She said, God loves you so much. He brought you all of this grain. Miraculously, he brought you all of this grain. And he takes an oath saying, all of that grain is hektish, all of that grain is sanctified, it's sacred grain, and we're not allowed to touch it. And we're not allowed to have access to it. And from this, the commentators and the Jewish law decisors, they say that there's a general prohibition against benefiting from something which exists miraculously. So this grain, which appeared out of nowhere, the ex nihilo, they prayed yesh miyayin out of nowhere, so that's something which one is not allowed to go ahead and get any benefit from. And there's a lot of detail which the commentators discuss about whether or not the circumstances when it may be okay, it may not. Is it biblically prohibited? It's rabbinically prohibited. Is it prohibited just the one for whom the miracle was done, or it's prohibited for everybody? So there's a lot of things. One of the questions which they ask about this is about the very premise that one isn't allowed to benefit from a miracle. Is we know that for 40 years the Jews traveled in the desert. What did they eat and what did they drink? So they ate the man, which somehow fell from the heavens. That would certainly seem to be a miracle. It was a food which was, could taste like whatever it is that you wanted. And the water that they drank was from the well of Miriam's well, which followed them around as they traveled. So the notion of a traveling well is certainly a miraculous type of thing. So how could anybody assert that there's a prohibition to benefit from miracles when clearly the Jewish people for 40 years survived and consumed this miraculous food and drank this miraculous water? So it's a fascinating topic to be able to explore in and of itself. One of the things which they say is this is something that Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who is a great scholar about 300 years ago or so. So one of the things which he says is he differentiates between a miracle of something where an ex nihilo type of miracle, where something came into existence which did not exist at all previously, versus having a small amount of something and it sort of expanding and becoming larger. So as long as you have a start, at the end of the day, every redwood tree started off as a seed. How a seed becomes a redwood tree, it's a miracle of miracles that something that small could become this huge, massive tree that you could drive a truck through. But as long as you have some material to start with, then it's not as miraculous if it grows. You just put some miracle grow and it'll grow, as big as you want. But to go ahead and create something from nothing, that already is a miracle of literally biblical proportion. And that's something where that may be where the restriction is going to go ahead and apply.
I actually have a couple of questions here. So starting with the thing you mentioned later was, why is the story in the desert not ex nihilo? Like, where did this bread come from? I'm assuming it just literally fell from the sky or just popped up out of nowhere.
Right. So that they say that it may very well be that since there was no other way to access food, that may have been an exception to the rule. Or that may be why that may be evidence that it's not a biblical prohibition, it's only rabbinic. Because in the Bible, they seemingly did they did benefit from the miraculous falling of the manna.
Okay. And then my second question is, going back to the original story. So, I mean, I can't help but, I know this is probably not your point, but so what happened to the daughter? Like, did she just not have clothes? Like, did he sell the grain, or like what was the conclusion to that story?
Yeah, so the Gemara doesn't tell that part of the story, like what her wedding actually looked like afterwards. We just know that the story was to illustrate, his righteousness and whatnot, and his refusal to benefit from the miraculous stuff. I don't know what, they probably had some herring and kichel or something like that. They probably had, tam tams, some very basic foods at the wedding, rather than something which is elaborate.
Got it. And back to Cinderella. So I'm assuming this means she wouldn't. Well,
no, she would
because it's something from.
It came from the pumpkin, became the carriage, and the mice became the horses. So everything which was miraculous, things were miraculously transformed, not miraculously created. And that's why the fairy godmother warned her, at midnight, everything is going to revert back to its original factory settings. For some reason, despite the fairy godmother's warning, where everything else reverted back to its originally factory settings at midnight, when Cinderella runs out, she leaves behind one glass shoe. And for some reason, that doesn't go back to whatever its original state was. That remains a glass slipper. So now the prince realizes that he'll be able to find his bride-to-be, whoever this shoe is made for, whoever fits in that shoe, is going to be, that's the one he was dancing with through the night, who suddenly ran away. So there's a general obligation that the Torah has to return lost objects. You see an object, and there's a lot of details regarding the circumstances in which you find the lost object to determine whether it needs to be returned or not. But you would assume in the time and the setting of Cinderella, she probably did not have hundreds of pairs of shoes. People probably did not have that. Shoes were probably custom made. And you would only have maybe 1 or 2 pairs of shoes, maybe 3 pairs of shoes. So we assume that this is something which is going to be very valuable, and nobody's going to walk around with only one shoe. That's just that's right. Something which is not going to be acceptable. So we return the object. So within those laws about returning objects, so there's a few interesting things. So one is how do you find out what announcement do you make? Because the owner, you have the lost object, the owner has to come to you and demonstrate to you that they're the owner of the object.
Right. So presumably if you have hey, diamond earrings, who this
everybody's going to step forward and say, right, everybody's going to say, oh, that's mine. So we need what's called a siman. We need some sort of identifying mark, which is unique to your object, that you could reference that, and that will demonstrate that that's actually yours. So now, an easy example is how many iPhones exist in the world? Millions, if not billions. Right. Yeah, hundreds of millions. How are you going to be able to tell which is your iPhone? Because it has your contacts, your information. It has your unique phone number. Right. So being that, you could go ahead and you could identify. You could say, I'll call the phone, and if that's my phone, it's going to ring, because how else would I know the phone number unless that's my phone? Right, that type of thing. So there's ways by which we could identify something so that the finder will say, indeed, you are the owner because you described it in some unique way where only the owner would know that. That
makes sense. And if I can predict, I don't mean to jump the gun, but I'm assuming if it fits on your foot. But even so, there must be, there's only, how many shoe sizes are there?
Right. So in the time when it was, as we were talking now, I'm trying to think, because to shape glass, you usually have to shape it when it's hot. So I don't know how you make a glass slipper that fits a person's foot perfectly without the glass being hot. But okay, I'm not sure about that. That's going to bother me later today. But there is a notion, it is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, in the code of Jewish law, that the size, the weight, the number of something are all identifying marks. So a dozen eggs is not an identifying mark. But if you say, I lost a dozen $5 bills, that already is something that's unique. How'd you know that there were a dozen $5? How do you know they were $5 bills? If somebody announces, I found money, if it's yours, come to me. So you come to me and say, I lost some money, that's mine. I'll say, okay, how much money did you lose? And you tell me $3 and I have $60, clearly you're lying. If you tell me it was $60, I could say, okay, what denominations? So $60 could be three 20s, it could be 6 10s, it could be, any sort of thing. If you're able to tell me exactly the denominations and what the total number is, the only person who would know that would be the owner of that cash. So we use those types of things. So correct. So the fact that the prince was very wise in saying that we'll be able to find the owner of the shoe. I'll be able to do the mitzvah of returning a lost object of this shoe to the one who it fits. And that was going to be the way that who else would it fit that exact size, the exact shape of her foot when they didn't manufacture shoes in size 8, size 9, size 10s, size 11s. I imagine that's a more recent invention. Back then, they would measure your foot and they would make the shoe around your foot, whatever. They didn't have sizes. They just measured the foot by foot.
Yeah, fair enough. Good point.
So therefore, another interesting thing is that within that commandment of returning lost objects, so some of the commentators explain that if I realize I found your microphone. Let's say I say to you, I found your microphone. So I say, great, could you bring it over to my house? I don't have to bring it to your house. Although the command is called Hashavas Aveda, returning lost objects, I don't have to be your delivery person to give you back your thing. I fulfill my obligation by contacting you and say, I have your lost object. Once I tell you I have your lost object and you know that I have it, it's not a lost object anymore. If you want it, you got to come pick it up. I don't have to spend money. I don't have to spend time. I don't have to do anything for you in order to get it to you. I just have to let you know that I have it. Which is it's an interesting thing because sometimes people get confused about that. And sometimes that makes them hesitate to pick up lost objects because they say, oh, it's going to be such a pain. I'm going to have to drive to who knows where to return it to this person. I don't want to spend the time or the energy of that. You don't have to spend any time. You just have to find the owner and then they have to come pick it up by you. And if they pick it up, they pick it up. And if not, so you'll tell them, listen, I'm not holding on to this forever, whatever. So that is that.
No, fascinating. Okay. Yeah, it's good to know. It's funny because that's not the prince's intention, right? He's not trying to return.
He's not. Yeah. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he was actually just trying to do the mitzvah. Yeah. That's part of the rabbinic license which we take when we're doing these. When we're doing the stories.
Fair enough.
Then the last thing is there's a fascinating discussion in Jewish law about. There's a general discussion about how you appraise the value of a used object, based on your purchase, based on its resale value, all sorts of interesting things about that. So what happens, the case here, it's going to be a case of a shoe, but the classic case is, let's say a woman had bought a pair of earrings for $100. And she says to you, Ophir, could you watch my earrings for me? I'm going to, wherever it is, I'm going out of town and I don't want to leave them in the house. Will you watch the earrings for me? You say, yeah, no problem. And then she comes back and she says, Ophir, could I have my pair of earrings? And you go to retrieve them and there's only one earring. So how much do you owe her? Because you lost the earring. So you owe her $50 because half of 100 is 50. So maybe you'll say that you owe her $50 for the lost earring. But on the other hand, and this is certainly true of a shoe, as a pair of shoes have value. What are you going to do with a single shoe? Forget about in the NBA that they wear different color shoes on their feet. That's a more modern phenomenon. But most people on the street wear a pair of shoes. You don't wear one shoe. So what's the value of a single shoe?
You're just going to throw the other one out.
Right. So if
a perfect example is if one shoe breaks, you're not keeping the other shoe, you're throwing them both out.
Yeah. What I do? So let's say I shatter one of Cinderella's glass slippers. So what's she going to do with the other one?
Throw it out. I'm going to keep it maybe put it as a trophy shop and wear it.
But I only broke one of them. I have to pay you the full $100 when I only broke one of them?
Good point. I don't know.
Right. No, so it's a fact. There's no definitive answer to that. The corollary, which is even more interesting, and then with this we'll conclude, is let's say you own 2 rare stamps. Each one is worth $5,000. So you have 2 rare stamps, each one worth $5,000. I come and say, can I see these rare stamps? I love stamps. I forgot the term for person who collects stamps, but I love stamps. Could I see them? And you say, sure, no problem. And I look at it and I destroy one of them. So I destroyed a $5,000 stamp, right? So seemingly you'd say, I owe you $5,000 for destroying a $5,000 stamp. But now that there's only one of that rare stamp which exists in the world, the other one just doubled in value. And the one which remains is now worth $10,000. So what's your net loss?
Zero.
But what did I destroy?
$5,000.
Right. So do I owe you anything? If you didn't suffer a net loss, do I owe you something or I don't owe you something?
Brain teasers. I don't know.
Right. No. So it's a huge debate amongst Jewish law authorities about what we would do in such a situation. What exactly is the definition of damages? Is damages the damage to property, or damages is the net loss of the damaged party? And it's that we don't have definitive sources which were able to prove one or the other being correct. It's a fascinating thing.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. Like, I really want to know the answer, but thankfully that's not our case because we're just with it.
Right, because we ultimately found both shoes, and they were able to be restored as a pair. But the very fact that one of them was missing for a while.
Well, no, it didn't. Like, Lady Tremaine tripped the guy, and they broke that glass slipper.
Oh, yeah, right. I actually went right. There was a part which we skipped. So that's in my head. I skipped over that part. Right. They actually shattered it. So her liability for causing the break of that one shoe. Right. So that would be the discussion. How much would Lady Tremaine have to pay for breaking the one shoe in the pair? Correct.
Got it. Okay, Rabbi, this was like a tour through Cinderella. I never knew that me watching this animated series when I was a kid would have yielded such great fruits. But this is fantastic. I'm delighted, and thank you so much for joining us.
So it was such a good time for me. I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, if anyone, feel free to share this. And for any listeners, if you guys enjoyed this episode, then please hit subscribe, follow the show, listen for more. It's great stuff. And Rabbi Schaffel, I'm happy to share any links that you have. Look at for more from Rabbi Schaffel. I'll share any links below.
All right, take care. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really, really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for tuning in to the Dilemmas on Screen, a Jewish Perspective podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you have any suggestions for a moral dilemma you'd like analyzed, feel free to send it over. Thanks again, and see you next time.